Hudson thought he ruled the school until he threw out the wrong black kid. One phone call, and a black helicopter hovered over the building, making his legs suddenly shaky. Students pulled out their phones, teachers exchanged nervous glances, and the real question hung in the air. Who's actually in charge here? But the real shock came when the boy's father stepped out of the helicopter and turned out to be much more than just a farmer. The Alabama sun was merciless, turning the school into a giant, overheated oven. The old building, barely holding together, smelled like sweat, dust, and old textbooks nobody had read in years. Inside, Jamal Walker, 12 years old, walked into class, already tired and out of breath. His shirt clung to his back, his shoes had seen better days, and his notebook was so worn out it looked like an artifact from ancient history. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was here. His father, Lamar Walker, was a farmer. Corn, cows, eggs, the usual. Hard work, honest living. But Lamar had drilled one thing into his son's head since birth. Education is your ticket out. They can take a lot from you, but not what's in your mind. Jamal believed that. Unfortunately, Mr. Hudson did not. Hudson was the kind of teacher who looked like he had given up on life years ago, but was too stubborn to retire. His graying hair clung to his scalp like a bad decision, and his breath smelled like cheap coffee and unfulfilled dreams. He always had something to say when Jamal walked in, like the kid's very existence ruined his day. Hudson took a long sip of his coffee, then squinted. "Late again, Walker." Jamal, still catching his breath, tightened his grip on his notebook. He had woken up before the sun, helped his father feed the animals, sprinted 2 miles to catch the bus, only to watch it leave without him. So, he had run all the way here. He opened his mouth to explain. Hudson smirked. "No need. I already know the excuse." "Oh, sir, I was busy with farm work, sir." The class snickered. Jamal's fingers curled into fists. "Shouldn't you be somewhere else? Maybe chasing chickens instead of wasting a desk in my class?" More laughter. Jamal stared at his teacher, his stomach burning with frustration. He wanted to speak up, to tell Hudson exactly what he thought of him. But he knew how this worked. If he said anything, he was being disrespectful. If he said nothing, he was being weak. Lose-lose situation. Hudson leaned back, looking smug. "Actually, you know what? Don't even sit down." Jamal blinked. "What?" Hudson's smile widened. "You're done here, Walker. You're not a student in my class anymore." The room froze. Even the kids who usually enjoyed the drama looked shocked. This wasn't just the usual insult. This was serious. Jamal felt his heart pound in his ears. "Sir, Out!" The finality of it hit like a brick wall. Jamal stood there, his legs suddenly heavy. If he argued, Hudson would double down. If he begged, it would only make him look pathetic. So, he did the only thing he could. He grabbed his backpack, his movements slow and deliberate, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him break. The class watched, some wide-eyed, others pretending to look away. Even the ones who usually laughed the loudest seemed unsure now. Jamal walked to the door, paused, took one last look at his classmates, and stepped outside. The door slammed shut behind him. The hallway was eerily silent. Jamal just stood there, staring at the peeling paint on the lockers. His chest was tight, his fists clenched, his head spinning. Everything he had worked for, gone in a single moment. Because he was poor, because he was black, because no matter how hard he worked, some people would always see him as less than. He took a deep breath and walked outside. The sun was blazing, the air heavy. He dropped his backpack onto the steps and sat down, staring at the empty parking lot. He felt like he was drowning in anger, but there was nothing he could do, or so he thought. Because then, a deep, distant rumble shook the air. Jamal frowned. The sound grew louder, a deep, rhythmic chopping sending vibrations through the ground. He looked up. A helicopter, and it was coming straight for the school. Jamal sat on the school steps, gripping his backpack so hard his fingers ached. His chest burned, his mind raced. Kicked out. Just like that. No warnings, no second chances. Hudson had made up his mind before Jamal even walked through the door. He bit the inside of his cheek, refusing to let frustration show. He had done everything right, kept his head down, worked twice as hard, stayed out of trouble. And yet, it still wasn't enough. It never was. Then came the sound, a deep, rhythmic thump, thump, thump that rattled the air. It wasn't a car engine or some old school bus struggling up the road. This was something else. He looked up. A helicopter. Not just any helicopter. This thing was huge, black, and deadly serious. The kind you see in movies about secret missions and high-stakes operations. It moved with purpose, lowering slowly over the school. Students started rushing to the windows. Some ran outside, pointing, whispering. A few teachers stepped onto the front lawn, shielding their eyes against the glare. "Is that the FBI? Maybe the governor's here." "Dude, that looks military." Jamal's heart pounded. He had no clue what was happening, but something told him this wasn't random. Inside the school, Hudson finally stepped out, his usual cheap coffee clutched in one hand. He squinted up at the helicopter, frowning. For the first time today, Jamal saw uncertainty on his face. Across town, Lamar Walker sat at the kitchen table, his hands tense on the wooden surface. The call had come just minutes ago, from one of the local farm kids who had seen everything. His boy had been kicked out of school, for nothing. His wife stood by the sink, her hands trembling slightly. "Lamar, don't..." He didn't answer. He just picked up his phone and dialed. The response came instantly. "I already know. I'm on my way." Lamar exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm. His jaw tightened, his fingers curled into a fist. "They think they can throw my boy out like he's nothing?" His wife took a step closer. "Please, don't do something you'll regret." Lamar's gaze locked onto hers. His voice was steady, unshaken. "I'm not the one who's gonna regret this." He grabbed his keys and walked out the door. Back at the school, the helicopter was nearly touching down. Wind whipped across the pavement, sending loose papers flying, rattling the windows. Students huddled in groups, shielding their faces from the gusts. Some were filming. The principal had stepped outside now, his face pale. Teachers whispered among themselves, none of them sure what was going on. Hudson stood near the entrance, shifting uncomfortably. His grip tightened on his coffee cup. He glanced at the principal, then back at the helicopter. Jamal watched him closely. The smug confidence, the arrogance, all of it was gone. A door on the side of the helicopter swung open. Jamal's breath hitched. Whoever was inside was here for him. The helicopter hovered just a few feet above the ground, its powerful blades kicking up a storm of dust and loose papers. The deafening roar drowned out the hushed whispers of the students and teachers gathered in front of the school. Then, without hesitation, 4 men in sharp suits and dark sunglasses jumped down from the aircraft. They moved fast, focused, and completely in control, their presence alone enough to send a ripple of tension through the crowd. No words, no wasted movements, just pure authority. They weren't carrying weapons, but they didn't need to. Their presence was loud enough. And then Lamar Walker appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a stride that spoke louder than any words ever could. His face was carved from stone, calm, unreadable, and absolutely in control. The sun glared against his polished boots as he walked with the kind of confidence that turned heads and silenced doubters. Jamal sat frozen on the steps, watching his father approach. He had never seen him like this before. Lamar stopped right in front of Jamal and placed a firm hand on his shoulder, his grip steady and reassuring. Then his sharp gaze locked onto Hudson. "You threw my son out of this school?" His voice was low, steady, the kind that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Hudson swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed. He took a step back, suddenly looking much smaller than usual. "Well, this is a school, sir. We have rules." His voice cracked mid-sentence. Lamar tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Rules?" His tone carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. Hudson forced a nervous chuckle, trying to find some footing in the conversation. "I mean, we have standards, a structure. It's important to—" "Do you know who I am, Hudson?" Lamar's voice cut through the air like a blade. The color drained from Hudson's face. The students watching leaned in closer. Some had their phones out, recording every second. Even the principal, standing awkwardly nearby, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else but here. Hudson forced an uneasy smile. "I know you own a farm." His voice trailed off. Lamar nodded slowly. "A farm. Yes." He let the words hang for a second before taking a step forward. Hudson instinctively stepped back. "But I'm also one of the largest investors in this school's funding." The crowd gasped. Even the principal's face twisted in shock. Jamal blinked, his mind struggling to catch up. He had known his father was respected, but this? Hudson stammered, eyes darting toward the principal for help. I didn't know that." Lamar's lips curled into the smallest hint of a smirk. "Well, now you do." His voice dropped an octave. "And I can shut this school down if I decide it's no longer worth my money." Hudson froze. The reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. Lamar's gaze bore into him, unreadable but heavy with meaning. "You're done here, Hudson." The words cut through the air like a gavel slamming down in a courtroom. Hudson took a shaky breath, his lips parting as if to argue, but there was nothing he could say. His career just ended in real time. Lamar turned to the principal, who stood stiff as a statue. "I'll be filing an official complaint, and if I ever hear about another student being targeted like this—" He lifted his chin and gestured toward the helicopter behind him. "Next time it won't be businessmen coming down those steps. It'll be lawyers, and they'll take this place apart piece by piece." Silence. The weight of those words settled over the school like a storm cloud. Hudson's head dropped. He knew it was over. Jamal, still sitting on the steps, watched his father in awe. For years, he had thought of Lamar as just a hard-working man, a farmer, someone who kept his head down and provided for his family. But standing there now, he saw something different. His father was a man who fought for his own, a man who didn't let injustice slide, a man who walked into a storm and made the wind change direction. Jamal had never been more proud, and that was a lesson he would never forget. What would you have done in Jamal's or his father's place? Would you have stood by or fought for justice? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. If you or someone you know has experienced something similar, let us know. Support this story with a like if you believe in exposing injustice and standing up for what's right. This story was created not to divide, but to inspire change, to shed light on bias and remind everyone that respect and fairness should be for all. Together, we can make the world a better place. Your opinion matters.